All right, so hi everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's presentation, Everything You Need to Know About Public Service Loan Forgiveness. My name is Nadia. I'm a librarian with the Adult Programming Department at the Woodbridge Public Library. If you have any library-related questions or concerns, please feel free to direct them to me in the chat. I'm listed as WPL librarian. And like I said 2 seconds ago, all of your cameras are going to be turned off, mic's going to be muted to help with the sound quality and to help us stay focused on the presentation. If you do have a comment or question, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to be doing a Q&A following the presentation. To stay updated on our upcoming events, please feel free to check out our Facebook, Instagram, or website, woodbridgelibrary.org. And now please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Winston Berkman-Breen of the Student Borrower Protection Center.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for organizing this and for inviting me to come talk with you all about the public service loan forgiveness and your federal student loans. So as Nadia said, my name is Winston Berkman-Breen. I'm the Policy Counsel and Deputy Advocacy Director at the Student Borrower Protection Center. As I intro myself, I'm going to share my screen and get the presentation going. All right, so you should all be able to see the screen now. So the Student Borrower Protection Center, we're a national nonprofit policy organization whose sole focus is ending the student loan debt burden. That can take a lot of different forms: federal student loan, debts you owe directly to your school, debt collection, origination, etc. We do a combination of federal and state advocacy, legislative advocacy, regulatory work directly with borrowers, and we also do some litigation. So tonight we're going to talk about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not have heard of it. You're all coming from different backgrounds. That's great. The one thing I'm going to ask of you tonight, in addition to, as Nadia said, sort of staying on mute for the presentation, it's about 20-25 minutes, then we'll do Q&A, is to take what you learned tonight and bring it back into your communities, right? Everyone knows someone, if they don't themselves have student loan debt, they know someone who has student loan debt. And if you work in public service, this is a really important program for you. So what I'm first going to do is just explain what the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program is, how it works, etc. And then I'm going to tell you about some current events, some changes that are happening to the PSLF program that you're going to want to know about and take advantage of because they're time limited. And then as a third sort of phase, I'm going to walk you through some concrete steps that we advise everyone take advantage of those current opportunities that are time limited. So some of it might feel a little bit repetitive. So I'm going to tell you about the program, then certain changes, and I'm going to walk you through how to do steps. But repetition is important. It's how we learn. And all in all, it'll only take about 20 or 25 minutes. Then I'm happy to answer any questions for the remainder of our time. If you do have questions in real time and you're worried about losing them, feel free to put them in the chat. I think then we'll have plenty of time to circle back and we can answer questions from the chat, or people can unmute themselves depending on how we're feeling. I will say that and I said this to Nadia too, when I'm presenting, my screen is full, so I can't necessarily see the Zoom. So if at any point, for some reason, I need to stop or slow down, someone can note it in the chat and Nadia can come off mute and ask me to do whatever it is that needs to be done. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to jump in. So, public service loan forgiveness. So Congress created the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program in 2007 to help public service workers who are struggling with their student loan debt, but also to make sure that future students and graduates wouldn't be deterred from entering public service because of their debt. So put simply, the PSLF, Public Service Loan Forgiveness, promise is that if a borrower works in public service for 10 years, after that time, their remaining federal student loan debt will be forgiven. It's a simple concept, but as we're going to see in the next few slides, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So how does PSLF actually work? So it's not just about working in public service for 10 years. There's actually 4 requirements and 4 specific criteria that you have to satisfy. I'm going to say all 4 of them now, and then we're going to spend a couple slides and drill down on each one of them just so that you really get a chance to absorb it. So the first requirement is that you have to have a direct loan. That's one of the several federal student loan types. And again, we'll talk about it. Second, you need to be in the correct repayment plan, which for the program and for most people is going to be what's called an income-driven repayment plan. Third, you need to work in public service, which sounds self-explanatory, but we'll talk about it. And fourth and finally, you need to make 120 qualifying payments. So that's 10 years worth of 12 monthly payments. So now let's drill down on each of these. So the first requirement, only direct loans qualify for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. So direct loans have been the major or like exclusive really, for the most part, federal student loans since 2010. So if you took out a loan since then from the federal government, it likely is a direct loan that already qualifies. If you have an older loan, some of them are called a federal family education loan or a FFEL, FFEL loan, or a Perkins loan. Those do not qualify directly, but what you can do is you can do something called consolidate those loans into a direct loan. We're going to talk about all of these terms, but what consolidation really is it's like refinancing with the federal government. You're basically handing in your old federal loans and taking out a new federal loan for the same amount, but it'll be that type, that direct loan. You're switching types that you need to qualify for PSLF. So critically, normally under the PSLF program, when you do this, you lose any credit you would have had on your old loans towards loan forgiveness. So if you'd worked in public service for 5 years, but you had the old loans, you find out that you need to get the eligible loans, you do all the steps you need to do to convert them into the direct loans, your direct loan is going to start at 0 counter. It's not going to have that 5 years grandfathered in. That's how it normally works. And that's very frustrating for folks, right? If you don't hear about the requirements early enough and you feel like you've lost time when you finally catch up. One of those special opportunities that I mentioned right now that we're going to talk about is that there's a special waiver window in time right now when the government will let you grandfather in that old time, that work you've already done for your new loan. So we're going to talk about that, but it's an unusual special opportunity. Okay, so second requirement, right? Your direct loan needs to be in the right repayment plan, which is generally going to be something called an income-driven repayment plan. So these names, so income-driven repayment plan is sometimes abbreviated to IDR. So if you hear me say IDR, that's what I'm talking about. So these IDR plans go by a couple of different names. There's one called an income-based repayment plan, or IBR, or an income contingent repayment plan, or ICR. There's one called pay as you earn, or PAYE, and there's one called revised pay as you earn, REPAYE. They have slightly different variations, but all have essentially the same format, which is that they calculate your monthly payment based on a percentage of your income. So normally your monthly payment for a regular federal student loan is just how much do you need to pay each month to pay off the whole thing in 10 years. That's how they figure it out. With an IDR, they say, what is 10 or 15% of your monthly income? And that's what we'll charge you. And it's usually, but not for everyone, it's usually lower than that standard 10-year plan. But it also means that it takes longer to pay off, right? Because you're just making smaller payments. It's not that you're delinquent or behind. It's just that they expect a lower payment from you. But it does mean that it can take a lot longer. Under an IDR plan, if you are in that plan for 20 or 25 years, which is a long time, and you have any loan left, it'll be forgiven at that point. That's not really relevant for PSLF because you're going to get your loan forgiven after 10 years. But it's important to know because when you're making those lower IDR plan payments, sometimes you're not really even paying enough to cover the interest. So you can see your account grow and grow, and it can be very anxiety inducing, right? Understandably, to make a payment and see your account get bigger. And a lot of people experience this. But for PSLF, it's okay because your loan's going to get forgiven. And even if you're not doing PSLF, which is the topic of tonight, after a certain period of time, your loan will get forgiven. So for PSLF, your monthly, it doesn't actually matter how much you're paying on the IDR for PSLF. It just matters that you're in an IDR plan. So you might qualify if you're low income for $0 plans, a $0 payment where what's expected of you is actually nothing, but it'll still count as a monthly payment, so to speak. Okay, so first requirement was what kind of loan do you have? It should be a direct loan. Second requirement is, are you in the right repayment plan? It should be an IDR plan. There are a couple of other plans that can count, but in different circumstances. So the rule of thumb, if you're not doing an individualized sort of loan assessment or counseling, is to look for an IDR plan. Okay, third, to get public service loan forgiveness, you need to work in public service. Now, importantly here, the focus is on the employer, not your role. It doesn't matter what function you play at this organization. It just matters whether the organization qualifies as a public service employer. So what counts as a public service employer? So you can work at any government organization. So that covers, city, state, federal, tribal, county, public school district, or any 501c3 nonprofit organization. Some other nonprofit organizations also count, but it's a little bit ad hoc, right? So 501c3, that tax designation, all of them count. So all government, all 501c3, and some other nonprofits. In addition to working for the right kind of employer, you need to work what's considered full-time. So for the program, full-time is considered the greater of 30 hours a week, or if your employer says something greater than 30 hours a week, whatever that is. So if they say 40 hours a week, you need to work 40 hours a week. They need to consider you full-time. If you work for multiple employers and that they each qualify, you can pool those hours together. So if you work part-time in the library, or if you work part-time as an adjunct professor, you can add those up, and as long as it exceeds 30 hours a week, that will be all that you need. And actually, just hold on 1 second, if you can bear with me. I am just going to change one thing here. Apologies, folks. This is the working from home, right? I just need to turn off a alarm that maybe you can't hear, but I can hear. So just one moment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll pop right back on where we were. I can figure out how to do that. Just bear with me.
In the meantime, if anybody has any questions, feel free to start dropping them in the chat.
Okay, thank you. So with the, I'm just going to go back to one more slide. So 30 hours a week, you can combine it. The other important thing is that if you work contract that isn't a full year, let's say you're a public school teacher and you work 9 months out of the year, the government recognizes that. And so it'll say 30 hours over the term of your contract per week, right? Because if you spread out that 9 months over 12 months, it might be less than 30 hours. So that's the third requirement, is that you work for the right kind of employer and that you work full-time for that employer. And finally, you need to make 120 of these qualifying payments. So payments on the right loan, on the right plan, and during the right employment, right? The payments have to be made in full and on time. And if you leave public service, you can come back and pick right back up where you were before. It doesn't have to be all for the same employer or all consecutive over 10 years. If you take time off to work with your family or switch into a private sector job or lose your job and then come back into a qualifying job, you pick right back up where you were before. Okay, so that's the last requirement. So we're living in COVID, right? So how has the program PSLF been affected by COVID? There's really one major impact, which is that for loans that are benefiting currently from that payment pause, so for the last 2 years, basically since March of 2020 and through April of this year, the majority of federal student loan borrowers have had their payments paused, $0 payments expected, 0% interest. Each month of this pause, the suspended payments towards PSLF will count towards those 120 months of loan forgiveness. But what's really critical is that you still have to meet the other requirements, right? You still have to have a direct loan, you still have to be employed with a proper employer, full-time, and you still need to get 120 total. So if you, have your loans in the pause, but you lose your job or you reduce your hours, those months aren't going to count, right? So it really just satisfies that one payment aspect of the requirement for the program. And the most relevant part of the program, the public service employer, is still in effect. Okay, so last October, the government announced, and I mentioned this, I alluded to it, right, announced a special waiver that's going to address many of the issues raised during the public service loan forgiveness program. So this program was created in 2007, which means that the first class of people who'd be eligible after 10 years worth of payments was in 2017 and 2018. When we saw the first couple of folks apply, it was very clear immediately that there were some problems. So the initial denial rate was 99%, was literally 99%. It was something like a couple hundred people out of a couple 100,000 people who applied got their loans forgiven. And the main issues were that folks were never really told what the program requirements were. They didn't know they have to be in a direct loan. They didn't know they have to be in an income-driven repayment plan. Those were the two main issues. And that was really hard for a lot of people because they spent 8 years, 10 years thinking they were ready to get loan forgiveness. And then the second they did, applied, they were told, I'm sorry, you have the wrong loan type. And to get the right loan type, you're going to have to start over at zero, right, as we mentioned. So there was this whole effort last year, the Biden administration, there was a lot of advocacy, including by the Student Borrower Protection Center, my employer, to have the Biden administration fix this. And then they opened a comment period and said, you know what, for the first time, we want to hear from borrowers. We want to hear about your experience with the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program so that we can try to fix it. And shortly after that, they announced this time-limited waiver. So basically what this is they're using emergency powers because of COVID. This is a very specific moment in time. This isn't a long-term fix because they're using these emergency authorities to change to waive and change some of the requirements. So for a limited time only, the Department of Education will retroactively give credit towards public service loan forgiveness to borrowers for months that previously didn't count, either because they had the wrong loan type or they weren't making the right type of payment. So we're going to walk through what this special waiver really means, but it effectively means that since 2007, when the program began, if you had any type of loan and were making any type of, were in any type of repayment plan, you can get credit as long as you had the right type of employment. But we're going to, again, walk through the specifics. Okay. So essentially what the waiver did, again, is it said that you can get credit for public service loan forgiveness regardless of loan type and payment plan. Since 2007 when the program began. So even in months when you didn't actually make a payment, as long as your status was in repayment, which is to say it wasn't in default or deferment or forbearance. Deferment and forbearance are two types of pauses you can put on your loan. If you call your servicer and say, I'm going through a tough couple months, can I get a break? They'll put you on a deferment or forbearance. So as long as you weren't in deferment, forbearance, or default, you will get credit for any month your loan was in repayment, even if you didn't actually make a payment, right? So it's really looking at the status of your loan for that month, not at what you actually did with your loan. These credits will be retroactive, so you can get credit even if you previously have been told specifically that a certain month didn't count. So I'm going to just sort of repeat this one more time because it is like the crux of this really awesome, amazing opportunity, and I want to make sure it sinks in. So in short, for any month since October 2007 that a borrower had any type of federal loan, worked for a qualifying public service employer, and was not in default, deferment, or forbearance, that borrower can get credit for those months towards the 120 that they need for loan forgiveness. Okay, so you can see on the screen in front of you, the red box around the direct loan and the IDR. It's because these are the two requirements that are being waived and changed. You still need to have the employment and you still need to have 120. Okay, but it's not automatic and it's not so simple, right? So normally PSLF requires that a borrower have that direct loan type. So although the waiver is saying you'll get credit for any loan type, those borrowers who don't have a direct loan need to consolidate it, and they, at the end of the day, need to have a direct loan to get the credit. They need to do that conversion that we talked about. Also, regardless of what your loan type is, everyone needs to fill out a form certifying your employment with the federal government. So you already have to do this with the PSLF program. They can't give you credit for work they don't know you're doing, right? They don't automatically match data, although they're trying to do that slowly. So you have to tell them, I worked at this place to qualify an employer. We are suggesting, and we'll get to this later, that everyone do that, even if you've already done it at one point in history, just to make sure that you get credit during this waiver period. So finally, the waiver only goes through October of this year. It was October of last year through October of this year. That means that any borrower who has to change their loan type through consolidation or certify their employment has to do it by this deadline. It does not mean that everyone will get their credit by this deadline. They're doing it on a rolling basis. It just means that your paperwork has to be in, and they're going to process as quickly as they can. Now, tons of folks have already gotten their loans forgiven under this program, so it is happening. It's not to say that no one's going to see a result until 2023 or something, but a lot of people are taking advantage of it, and there is a bit of a queue. But your job is to file your papers, consolidate your loan, et cetera, by this deadline so that you don't miss out on it. Okay, so with that in mind, there are three things that we are advising all borrowers do to make sure they can take advantage of this opportunity and to really figure out how does it apply to you. So we're going to talk about each of them, but briefly they are: confirm that your past and present employers qualify, determine what kind of loans you have and if you need to consolidate, and certify your employment. So again, let's talk about each three. again, repetition a little bit tonight. So first, confirm you have a qualifying employer. So nothing about this requirement has changed under the waiver, remember, except there is one part that has changed, which is that normally under PSLF, you have to still be in qualifying employment when you apply for and receive loan forgiveness. That means that folks who are trying to retire or change jobs are sort of trapped in their qualifying job until they get their loans forgiven, or they miss out on the opportunity. During the waiver, that's not true. So if you're already retired, or if you've already gone into the private sector or something else that doesn't qualify you, but you already in your past, since 2007, have 10 years, you can apply now and get your loans forgiven. So that's an important waiver. But in general, you should think of the requirement to have a qualifying job still in effect. So you need to confirm, do my employers check? If you aren't sure whether your employer qualifies as a public service employer, which again is all government, all 501c3, and some other nonprofits, the Department of Education maintains a list that you can search. You can access it on what's called the PSLF help tool at studentaid.gov. We're going to show you how to access that in a couple of slides. It's the first step of the help tool, so it's really easy to just pop in very quickly, look up your employer, and then move on without having to spend much time. Okay, so step 2. What type of federal loans do you have? Again, 3 major ones we mentioned: direct loan, federal family education or FFEL loan, and Perkins loan. So for public service workers to get loan forgiveness through the waiver, if you don't have a direct loan, if you have these FFEL, FFEL, or Perkins loan, you have to do that consolidation. You've got to turn them into the federal government and get a direct loan back from the federal government. Remember, what's special about the waiver is that normally when you do that, you reset the clock, you lose past credit, but the waiver is specifically giving you credit for your new loan based on the work you did for your past loan. So again, we're going to show you how to consolidate, how to look up your loans in a couple of slides. And then the third step that all public service workers should do with federal student loans is certify their employment with the Department of Education. So the form that you use to do this is called the PSLF form. It used to be called the Employment Certification Form, or ECF. So you might have heard of that, or maybe you've been doing it in the past. You can certify your employment. You can make the form using that same PSLF help tool, which again, we'll show you. So that's going to be sort of a one-stop shop. That tool will generate the form for you, and then you print it and you get your employer to sign it, you sign it, and you submit it to the federal government. So we'll see some slides on that in a moment. Okay, we just discussed the 3 things that everyone should do. Now we're going to do that step-by-step that I mentioned to show you how to actually do that. And at the end, we'll then turn to Q&A. So you will need to get familiar with this screen because you're going to see me reference it a lot, but you're going to need to log into studentaid.gov. So studentaid.gov is like the main portal for federal student loans. It is where you want to go to access everything from signing up for consolidation to the PSLF help tool for information on repayment plans. So here you can see the managed loans drop-down menu, and underneath it, when you hover over it, the public service loan forgiveness option. Both of them are circled or squared in red. When you click in there, you can go in and launch the PSLF help tool from the landing page for the public service loan forgiveness drop-down option. So you see in front of you sort of what it looks like, in that there's an option to add your employer, and then what you're going to need is what's called your employer's tax employer identification number, or EIN number, as well as your dates of employment. You can find your employer's EIN number on your W-2 or by asking your HR, or for larger employers, you can usually Google them. All employers, including government employers, have EIN numbers. So you put that in. I used to work for the state of New York, so I put in the state of New York's EIN number, the dates that I worked there, hit go, and you can see in front of you, state of New York pulled up, and it has a little green indicator that says it's an eligible employer. Again, all government, all 501c3, and some other nonprofits are going to be considered eligible employers. Now, this database is not exhaustive. It's people who have, it's employers whose employees have already applied, right? So it's a list of employers that the department has already made a determination on. So if you're the library, if an employee from the library has not filed, they're going to file their form or look up their employer, I should say, and they're not going to have, it's going to say like, undecided or something, right? That doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply. It just means that no one of your colleagues has already applied and made a determination. If something comes up and says ineligible, like a red button, and you think that's wrong, like you're like, no, I work for a 501c3, that can't be right. You should continue. This is not like determinative, right? It's just a really good tool to help you know in advance, do I qualify? Are my employers qualified? Okay. So that's how that's step 1, right? Check your employer. So now step 2, how do you know what kind of loans you have? So we're going back to studentaid.gov. I should say also that knowing your loan types is actually extremely confusing. It sounds very simple, right? You think you know what your loan types are, but it's very confusing, both in terms of, are your loans federal versus private? You know, the same companies service, like, interact with you about both federal and private loans, so that's confusing. And then which of your federal loans are direct loans and which are not direct loans. So it is legitimately confusing. So don't feel bad if you're sort of scratching your head because you don't know. We're going to show you how to figure it out. So you're going to go to studentaid.gov. You're going to log in. If you don't have your login info, you can create an account or reset it from the main page. And when you enter your account, there'll be a dashboard. And the dashboard will have a list of all your loans. And if you click each one of them, you'll just get a little summary of your loan. And basically, it's as simple as, does the loan have the word direct in it, or does it not have the word direct in it? These will all be labeled as like a direct subsidized loan, or a direct Stafford unsubsidized loan, or a FELP, FFELP, or Perkins loan, right? You can get a slightly more granular readout of your loans by clicking View Details and then Download My Aid Data. And on this next screen, I'm going to show you what that looks like. You don't have to do this, but it's the way to get the really granular one. So you can see where both these blue arrows are. It says loan type, and each says FFEL. So we know these are FEL loans, but more importantly, we know they are not direct loans. So we're going to have to consolidate them. We're going to have to convert them to make them qualify for this. Now, this report will have an entire history of all your loans. So if you have older federal loans that you've already paid off, or older federal loans that you've already consolidated once, those older ones will show up with a zero balance. You don't need to worry about those. You just, they're gone. You just need to worry about the ones that have a balance, because those are the ones you're trying to get forgiven. So you can either look at your dashboard or download this more granular data. All right, now, if you have non-direct loans, remember you have to consolidate them. So let's look at what consolidation looks like. We're going back to studentaid.gov. We're going to go back to Manage Loans dropdown, and then to the Consolidate My Loans option. Again, it's in red indicated here. So when you click that, you can then go in and launch the application. Again, you can click there to log in if you haven't, or start the application if you have. And then it'll really guide you through each step. You're going to have to select which loans you want to consolidate. You're going to get a confirmation about the loan amount and the rate of the loan. The rate will be a weighted average, right? So if you have a very large loan, outstanding balance, I should say, with a very low interest rate, and you have a very small loan that you're almost close to paying off but has a high interest rate, your new loan will blend the two of them, but it'll give more weight to the lower one, right? So that's what a weighted average means. It means it won't just be add the two of them together and divide by 2. It'll be a reflection of the loans you had previously. You're also going to select your payment plan and your servicer, and then you'll get to sign the loan. You'll get a confirmation, and you'll get some confirmation in the mail. The whole process takes a few weeks, but the actual application process takes like 25 minutes. So you can sit down and do this pretty quickly. Now, there is a specific tip related to the waiver that we want to flag. So if you have a mix of older loans and newer loans, maybe it's undergraduate debt and graduate debt, those undergrad loans, if you think about it, are going to be closer to the 10 years of work needed to pay off, right? Let's say you worked for 4 or 5 years, and then you went to grad school, and now you've worked for another 4 or 5 years. Those undergrad loans are going to have a cumulative close to 10 years, whereas the grad loans are going to have close to 5 years. If you consolidate them together, the federal government has been very clear about this. They are going to treat that new loan as being as old as the oldest underlying loan. So when you get that new consolidation loan of the undergrad and grad, in our example, for PSLF purposes, it'll be treated as having had close to 10 years of qualifying work, right? So that's, it's not a loophole because the government's saying this is how we're going to do it, but it's sort of a loophole. So if you have some loans and you're like, you know what, I'm close to PSLF on this one, it's going to be a couple more years for PSLF on that one, you can consolidate them together, even if they're already both direct loans and you wouldn't normally have to consolidate them. So it's a way to sort of get to loan forgiveness faster. Okay. Remember too, when you're selecting, or during the consolidation plan, when you're selecting your payment plan, you might want to select an income-driven repayment plan, especially if you think you're going to have to keep accruing more towards loan forgiveness. You want to be in the right plan after the waiver to make sure you get credit. And that's mostly going to be IDR for folks, right? So you're going to make a selection. What kind of plan do I want? There's going to be all the IDR plans, and it'll give you an estimate of what it'll cost you each month, and you can select that, and then you should be good to go. All right, finally, how do you certify your employment, right? This is step 3, and everyone should do this. Of course, studentaid.gov. We're going to manage loans, back to PSLF, that Public Service Loan Forgiveness page, back into that PSLF help tool. This should all be familiar. We did this once already. That first step was confirming your employer. Again, this should be familiar. And then the tool will guide you through the rest. It's going to have you select which plans, which loans to include. And once you go through all the steps, it'll generate a PDF form. You see that sort of on the right-hand side of the screen in front of you. And it'll have you ask your employer to sign it and you to sign it. And then there are instructions to submit it to a servicer. So everyone, you technically don't have to submit a form until you are eligible for forgiveness. You could wait your whole 10 years and do it. We really recommend that everyone do it on an annual basis. And the reason is that helps you track your progress, right? Every year you're going to see, oh, I got 12 more credits. I got 12 more credits. And if some year you're like, wait, why didn't I get any more credits? You can figure out what was going on. Maybe you fell off the wrong payment plan and you're in another payment plan. Maybe you never got any credit because you're in the wrong loan type, and then you learn quickly, right? If you wait 10 years, you've sort of lost the ability to reclaim that time. Whereas if you do it every year, at most it's a year that was ineligible and you can fix it going forward. So we really recommend everyone do it annually. But for the waiver, you need to do this by October 31st of 2022. Just get it filed by then. Even if you've done it in the past, unless you know that you regularly do it, make sure you do it again and make sure you certify for all eligible employment since 2007 when the program began. Because that's and get as much credit as you possibly can. Okay, so how does it actually work, right? So you're going to submit the form to a servicer, the ones who manage the loans. Currently, and there's instructions on the form for how to submit it. Currently, a company called Fed Loan Servicing, or FIA, is the exclusive servicer for public service loan forgiveness. So when you submit the form to them, they'll check and make sure that you have the correct loan type. And if they do, you'll transfer your account over to them. You will now be serviced by this company. And then they'll run through all the other criteria and they'll return a letter to you that says you have this many credits, or you don't have this many credits if something is not correct. So again, unfortunately, a lot of people find out the hard way that they weren't in the right plan or had the wrong loan. So it is really important to be on it. And the waiver makes that not an issue now. The waiver gives you the opportunity to reset and get credit. And then going forward, just be very diligent about it. You may have heard that this company, Fed Loan Servicing, is no longer going to run the program. That is true. They have announced that they're exiting the program. They're no longer going to work for the federal government. And eventually all their accounts and the servicing is going to be transferred over to a company called Mohila. You don't need to try to game the timing of this. You should just apply, get the waiver. If your account is going to be moved over to Mohila, you'll get a notice, they'll move it over. If you get your loans forgiven before the transition happens, that's great, but it's not happening like tomorrow, so you shouldn't wait. You should just make sure you keep really good records of everything and are always checking your accounts and making sure your contact info is up to date, and then things should be okay. Okay, so we're almost done. So that's actually the end of the PSLF part of it. I'm going to spend just one quick slide talking about the fact that payments have been paused and they're going to turn back on at some point soon, and then we can do Q&A. So just in a minute. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of folks, most federal student loan borrowers have been benefiting from a payment pause for the last 2 years. The monthly credits will count towards PSLF if you still have qualifying employment and help you get to that 120. At this point, you should know if you're a beneficiary of the payment pause. It was very confusing in the beginning in like March, April of 2020, who was going to get it. But at this point, you should have been made aware. You'll be, it's 2 years of making payments or not. So it's been extended multiple times. Currently, payments are going to resume in May. You should get a notice about 20 days before any payments actually expected of you. Not everyone's going to have a payment due in May. You'll get your statement in May and it'll be due in June or something along those lines, right? You should start taking precautions in like March, April to make sure that when payments come on, you're ready for them. Can you afford the monthly payment? You're going to be in whatever plan you were in February of 2020, right? So people's lives have changed, they've moved. You should update your contact information. You can use what's called a repayment estimator. If you Google FSA loan repayment estimator calculator, you'll get this tool on studentaid.gov and you can check and see how much the different plans would cost and figure out if that's affordable to you and get in an IDR plan if it's not going to be affordable for you. Remember, IDR is necessary for PSLF, so if you're planning forward, that might be a good option. If you were an auto debit and you want to get back into auto payments, you should set that back up again. For most people, you have to proactively do it. And then also, really, really, really be vigilant and look out for scams, especially because of this PSLF announcement and the return to repayment and the changing of the servicers. There's a lot of people out there trying to take advantage of you. Just mostly remember the government almost never will call you, right? If someone calls you and says they're from your servicer, you should hang up, go to your statement, look up the number from your statement. Don't just return their phone call number. Call them and say, hey, I just got a call. Are you actually trying to reach me? If someone says, hey, pay me to help you get loan forgiveness, hang up. You never have to pay to access federal student loan forgiveness, PSLF or otherwise. So you can pay someone to like take it off your hands. Paying for a service because you don't want to do it is very different than paying for it because someone said you have to access it through me. Okay, so that's the final note I'll say. The important takeaways we're just going to blitz through. During this waiver, you can get credit for months that didn't used to qualify. You really got to act by Halloween, basically. Don't sleep on this. Don't wait for it because it's a sort of once in a lifetime opportunity, frankly. Confirm your employer, confirm your loan types and consolidate if necessary. Submit your PSLF form. Make sure you're ready for repayment to resume. It might get extended again, but don't count on it. Just be vigilant and watch your inbox, update your contact information, read your mail. And if you experience an issue, chances are someone else is experiencing an issue, so you should file a complaint. You can do that with the CFPB. You can do that with the Attorney General in New Jersey, whatever state you're in. And you can do that with the Ombudsman at the Federal Student Aid, which is that studentaid.gov. That's that part of the Department of Education that runs the program. So you can Google FSA Ombudsman and file a complaint with them. Okay, so before we do questions, everything we just talked about is available on our website at protectborrowers.org/PSLF, including this presentation. It's broken up into 2 or 3 minute short tutorial videos. So if you're like, what was that part about consolidating? You can go watch a 3-minute video on consolidation. If you forget what the waiver is, there's a 3-minute video on just the overview of the waiver. So feel free to visit protectborrowers.org/PSLF. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to figure out how to stop sharing my screen, and then we can, there we go,
Jump into
take
our
some questions. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
So we've had a couple of comments and questions all throughout the presentation. So these are from the beginning. So Trish stated that you skipped over the Parent Plus, I guess the Parent Plus loans on the first slide.
So I'm not sure about them on the first slide. I'm going back, but I can talk about Parent Plus in general. So Parent Plus in general, and these are loans that you take out, they are your loans, but you take them out for your child or grandchild's education. It's not your kid or your grandkid's obligation. It's legally your loan for their education. Normally they are qualifying loan type for PSLF, but you have to consolidate them to access the IDR plans that you're going to need for PSLF, right? So it's very sort of convoluted. Very frustratingly, during the waiver, Parent Plus loans are not eligible. So you don't get this special waiver benefit for Parent Plus loans, only for loans you took out for your own education. There is no policy or legal rationale for that. There's been a lot of pushback. We'll see if the Department of Education changes that. But what you can do, just like that sort of tip we gave about older and newer loans, your undergrad and your grad loans, if you're a person who has Parent Plus loans and you also have loans you took out for yourself, you can consolidate them together, and the loans you took out for yourself will get the benefit of the waiver, and the entire new loan will be forgiven, including the Parent Plus dollars that went into it. So it's a mixed bag on Parent Plus loans.
Got a question from Nicole. Any period of forbearance and deferment in a period of time would disqualify a borrower completely for the waiver?
No, these are all, it's all by a month basis. So any month that you're in repayment, that month gets 1 credit. Any month that you're in deferment, forbearance, or a default, that month won't count. So it's not, there's nothing about PSLF that is ever categorically preventing you from getting access, except for, right, this like Parent Plus doesn't count for the waiver, but there's a little trick there. So same as if you come and go from an employer, you can keep accruing the 120. If your loan status enters deferment, forbearance, or default, and then exits it again, as soon as it exits and gets back in repayment, you will like historically get credit under the waiver. So if in 2012, you had 6 months where you needed to not be making payments, so you went into forbearance for a hardship, maybe your car broke, whatever it was, it's just that those 6 months won't count. But leading up to it and after it, once the loan gets back into repayment, those months will start to count again.
Right. And the next comment was from Melissa. I submitted an EFC for 24 payments in early October last year, right after the announcement for the temporary waiver. I still have not heard back about the review. Do we know how backlogged they are?
We don't know how backlogged they are. We just know that they are very backlogged. And some folks have gotten forgiveness already, not necessarily because they submitted a waiver, but because they'd submitted ECF after the waiver, but because maybe they always only had direct loans and maybe they already certified their employment previously. And so the government was starting to audit some people to try to give them credit proactively as quickly as they could. So some of the announcements about loans getting forgiven that we've heard have been because the borrower submitted a form, and sometimes it's because the borrower had like historically submitted a form, so the government already had the information. But in terms of you, like you submitted your form by the deadline, and so it's sort of just a waiting game, which is frustrating, but it sounds like you've done your part. As long as, you know, you said 24 payments, if you have qualifying work from before 24 months ago, make sure you certify that as well.
And another question from Nicole: can a borrower sign up for an IDR plan before October 31st and then qualify for forgiveness?
Can a borrower sign up for an IDR plan before that? So yeah,
I guess
I don't
that's,
understand the question. Can a borrower sign
I'm
up?
guessing if you signed up before the changes that they've made. I don't know. Nicole, if you have more information, please put it in the chat.
Yeah, and in general, like being on an IDR plan going forward is different than whether you're going to get past credit, because during the waiver, it doesn't matter what plans you were in historically. So really, in terms of signing up for IDR going forward, the two reasons to do it are affordability. Is an IDR plan going to help you afford your monthly payment? And then also, if you're not through the waiver, if you're not going to get 120 credits and you're going to have to keep accruing them, maybe the credits are permanent, I should say. So let's say if from the waiver you get 90 credits. You know, you had the wrong loan type before and you finally converted your loan and you get 90 credits, but it's not 120. You get to keep those 90. They're part of your permanent record, which means that you're going to spend another roughly, 2.5 years accruing credit. And that's why you want to be in an IDR plan going forward.
Then question from Aaron: what if I already have some direct loans on track for PSLF and other FFBL loans with Naviant? Would I consolidate? Would that throw me off track, or would they combine for PSLF?
So they're going to combine. So if you consolidate, so you have two options in this scenario. You can consolidate your FFBL, your FEL loans, just by themselves, not with the direct loans, and they will get as much credit as how old they are, assuming you have the right employment. This is a scenario there, though, where your direct loans sound newer than your FEL loans, right? So if you consolidate them all together, your whole new package will get as many credits towards 120 as the oldest underlying one. So if your FEL loans are like 11 years old and you've always been in repayment and your direct loans are 5 years old, if you consolidate them all together, in theory, you'll qualify for forgiveness of everything at once. But the whole point is that if you do it on time and you apply before Halloween, any new loan will get the grandfathered in credit of the loans that underpin it. So that includes combining your direct and your FEL, but it's going to always depend on how old each one is and a slightly personal assessment to know whether you should do them together, consolidated, or keep them separate, consolidated.
A question from Tracy: does the Naviant class action lawsuit affect loan forgiveness?
No. So the class action, so there was just a attorneys general state settlement with I want to say 39 states about 3 weeks ago, which is different than a class action. So I'm only making that point because there might be a class action out there that I'm not aware of, or I'm sure there is. A lot of people have sued Naviant, but the recent announcement about this was that a bunch, like over $1 trillion of private student loans are going to be forgiven for some borrowers because Naviant did some shady lending back in the day, but also Naviant did what's called steering. They directed borrowers into forbearances when they should have directed them into income-driven repayment plans. That would have been a better, more affordable long-term fix for these borrowers. And they didn't do that because it's more profitable for Naviant to keep you in a forbearance. Unfortunately, nothing about that settlement gives you credit for the forbearance months that you should have been in an IDR plan. So it doesn't really relate at all to improved eligibility for income-driven repayment forgiveness or PSLF forgiveness. There are still some additional federal investigations that might yield another outcome for borrowers that's sort of more helpful, but it is unlikely that a settlement will change the PSLF program. The federal government could still, a lot of people, including my organization, have been calling them to do this, changed the terms of the waiver to say that forbearance and deferment count in addition to repayment status because of this history of people getting steered. It's just that they haven't done that yet. So as of tonight, if you were in forbearance, you were just in forbearance, and that's really frustrating. But it could be that in the next few months, we hear the Department of Education has decided that folks in forbearance and deferment will also get credit for PSLF.
Great. We have another question from Aaron. Could you go back over, could you go back again to the qualifying repayment plans we need to choose? Is it any IDR, but not extended standard repayment?
So any IDR will count. So basically what will count is the standard plan, which is a 10-year payment plan. And the reason that counts is because you pay off your loan over 10 years, PSLF is also 10 years. So it sort of is all the same at the end of the day. So the standard plan, which is what you're automatically put in for most loans, any IDR plan will count, again, no matter what dollar amount it is. It's just that you're in the right plan. And not the extended plan, that just won't count. Some payments under what's called the graduated plan will count, but this is where you start to get into very murky, like personal circumstances. So the rule of thumb is standard plan or any income-driven repayment plan. And those plans are income-based repayment, income contingent repayment, pay, P-A-Y-E, repay, which is R-E-P-A-Y-E. Those are the main four, and you'll see those listed. Or if you were to Google income-driven repayment plans, those will be the results that you'd see.
And well, Trish wrapped around again. She was the one who asked about the Parent Plus loan. She asked us, why would a parent have a loan? I know for me, my parents took out loans to help pay for books and cover any difference that I had. So that's why they took out their Parent Plus loan in my behalf. But I don't know if you have any other reasons why a parent would have a loan.
Yeah, it's just another way that parents choose to support their child's financing for their education. Again, there's some frustrating parts of the program, but it's just a federal loan that's offered to let you take out a loan to pay for someone in your family's education.
And then a question from Tariff. I obtained the current employer's 5 years and going signature, but I'm unable to get signatures from a previous one. Do I need to submit the PSLF? I submitted PSLF in 2019. Do I have to submit it again?
So for the first part, if you have an older employer that you're not working for anymore, or your older employer went under, which happens, less so for government, but sometimes for nonprofits, right? If you just cannot get in touch with them or get them to sign a form for whatever reason, there is a little box on the PSLF form that you can check that says, hey, I tried and I just couldn't get them to sign it for whatever reason. And you can do that and submit the form. You should really, really try. Don't think of that as a faster way to get the form done. You should really try and make contact with them, because it's just easier if the employer is going to sign it. Because if you check the form, the Department of Education might ask you, follow up and say, all right, we need to have your old W-2s. We need some proof that you actually worked at this place. Normally it's the employer's signature that is that proof. So there is a route there, and it's not really that hard, but it is harder. So you should really just reserve it in case you actually can't get the signature. In terms of the other point, so if you submitted a PSLF form in 2019, and it sounds like maybe that was for the, you should do it as regularly as often. Like right now, if you haven't submitted a form since 2019, you're not going to get any credit for 2020, 2021, or we're in 2022. So again, the government can't give you credit for work it doesn't know you've done, and it's only ever going to give you credit for work that you've already done. So just because you were employed 1 year in one place doesn't mean you're going to stay employed there, right? They're not going to assume you stay with the same employer. You need to tell them where you've been working in the past. So if you haven't done a form since 2019, I recommend you do one, certainly before October, but as soon as you can, and then get in the habit of doing it every year.
And wrapping back around to a question asked earlier from Melissa, she's saying, thank you for answering my question. I have 22 payments left, so this 24 would help me hit my 120 payments.
Oh, great.
Congratulations.
It's always exciting. Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
Then Tracy has another question or follow-up and question. Thank you. So she's saying, thank you. So I should apply before October anyway, in case the forbearance will count. She had asked about the Naviant class suit.
You should definitely, folks should not wait around to see if there are any changes. You should apply as soon as you can. And if they come out and say, you know what, actually, we're going to count forbearances, they'll do that automatically on their end because they know when you were in forbearance. What they don't know is where you worked and when you worked there, right? So that's why you need to certify your employment. And if you don't have, the reason why you have to do the loan consolidation, if you don't have the direct loan type, is because the federal law says only direct loans get this. So this is like a cheeky workaround the government is doing. They're saying, all right, Congress told us you have to have a direct loan. So at the end of the day, we'll make sure you have a direct loan, but we're going to let you get credit for the old loans. But for the employment certification, again, it's because they don't know where you worked, right? So they know your loan history, they know your loan, payment history, so they can always go back and fix a forbearance issue if they decide to give credit for it. But you need to, as soon as you can, tell them where you've been working and when, so that they can give you the credit that you're owed.
And then Tara from earlier, I guess he's just trying to get confirmation. Do I have to work 10 years of government or nonprofit work? But
it can be
yes.
a total mix, but you have to have a total of 10. You can,
Yes.
You can have 3 years in nonprofit, 4 years in government, another 3 years not, it just has to add up to 10, but it doesn't have to be with the same employer or consecutively.
And another question, Marley asks, apologies if this has been answered. Do 2 part-time jobs at the same time in the same year count as full-time? I think we kind of covered that.
Yes, as long as the accumulation of the hours per week is 30. So as long as in a given month, if you were working 2 jobs, if the hours are at least 30 between the 2 of them, you'll get that month will count as a credit.
Question from Tanya, not sure if someone asks, what happens if the business closed or merged with another organization?
So if they merge, then it's probably you can get the new HR there to look in the old records. But if they close, there is going to be a box on that form that you can check, and that just says like the business is closed, or I really couldn't get in touch with them to have them sign the form. So if they're really no longer around, there's a little box you can check on that PSLF form and you'll get credit for it. They might again come back and say, do you have an old W-2? Do you have anything to show us that you worked for this place or that it really existed? But you can go ahead and check the form and submit it.
And Tracy, another question from Tracy, do the schools have to be Title I schools?
So I'm not sure which schools you mean, but it doesn't really matter because the answer is no. It doesn't matter where you went to school, where you took the loan out to go to school, and it doesn't matter what type of school you teach at if you're getting the PSLF credit through the tool, through teaching, as long as the school is a government or 501c3 school, right? So as long as your employer is government or 501c3 or certain other nonprofits, that's all that matters in terms of that eligibility. And again, it doesn't matter where you went to school. It doesn't matter, frankly, if you graduated with your degree that you took out your loans for. It just matters that you have the debt and the right loan type.
We have a couple more and then we're gonna probably wrap it up for tonight. Trish, another question from Trish. My daughter is a social worker for a for-profit nursing home. Are there any circumstances where the employment would count for loan forgiveness?
Yeah, so this is a really frustrating part of the way that this program is done, which is that it looks at the employer, not at your role, which means that folks who are caregivers, right, but for a for-profit company, and whether it's a nursing home or a hospital, or people who work for temp agencies who are like shift nurses who might go work at a public or nonprofit hospital next to PAs and doctors who are employees of the hospital, but technically, you're an employee of this placement agency that's for profit. You're not going to get credit if your employer is a for-profit company. If you're a contractor for the government, but your contractor, your boss is technically not the government, but it's a for-profit company, you're not going to get credit. This is not in the law. This is just how the department has decided to operationalize the program. And so there's also been some pushback for them to fix this, but it's not something anyone should rely on at any time soon, at least.
Okay, and then 2 more questions. A question from Alicia. One of my library jobs was listed as likely ineligible, but it was supposed to be confirmed or not. It has been 3 months since then. Should I just send the employer form anyway to speed things up?
Yeah, if you on the PSLF help tool look up your employer and it doesn't, you think it should be eligible, but it's not, that's not dispositive. Like, you should do your paperwork. If you work for a library and it's a public library or a 501c3 and you're like, this should definitely count, Winston told me it would count, you can file the paperwork. It does not hurt to file an ECF and get rejected. And frankly, if you're rejected, an ECF, sorry, the PSLF form, if you're rejected, there's an appeal process. So like definitely get your paperwork in and do it before October. And if you think that you should qualify, file and see what happens, and then you can appeal or put in, figure out why they said you're ineligible and deal with it then.
And the last question, I think we kind of covered this one. Another question from Tracy. If I've worked in 2 different schools over 18 years, do I send an employer certification to both employers?
Yeah, you have to get, again, they need to know where you were working, and the way that they prove that is have the employer say, yes, she worked here. So you need to go to each of them and get them to sign off on the periods of time you worked there and your status as like a full or part-time employee and how many hours a week. Most employers, are familiar with this process, but you definitely need to get credit for both of them. You need to get them both to sign the forms.
All right, and I think that's it for tonight. Thank you so much, Winston. I feel like we have so much information, so much knowledge. I feel like everyone pretty much got their answers answered, or questions answered in some form or fashion. But thank you so much for giving us your time and information. And
pass it on, right? Tell people in your
Yes.
life about this, especially because it's so time sensitive.
Exactly. And this the session is being recorded, like we said earlier, and everyone's going to get the link. It's also going to be available on our YouTube page for the Woodbridge Public Library. Also, like Winston said, on the Student Borrower Protection website, they have different videos breaking down everything as well. So you have access to all forms of this presentation going forward. But like I said, again, thank you to everybody. Appreciate you staying along for this journey tonight. And you'll be getting a follow-up email probably sometime next week or tonight. We'll see. But thank you again and have a great night, everybody.